Thought I'd begin my talk on the role of fathers in preventing child sexual abuse by showing this slide, which is a beautiful interaction between a teenage girl and her dad during a time of stress. And the things I'd like to point out, which are the goals of the work we do with dads, are that this is an interaction which is safe and appropriate. And the dad is there for her at a time of need. His love is unconditional and he's making her feel special and worthwhile. And I'll talk about the role of the Fathering Project in achieving these goals and affecting how fathers engage with their children, and other dads. And I've been asked to talk about the Fathering Project. Here's a beautiful image of a bunch of dads and a bunch of kids getting together. And what the Fathering Project does is it creates father-child activities which are safe and healthy and bonding and increase the connectedness between dads and kids, but also which we provide opportunities for beer and pizza nights where we provide information to the dads on various topics and how they can be a good dad, and I'll talk about that later. This is an example of a school's dads group, which is one of our key activities. But just in terms of dads and child sexual abuse and the literature around this, fathers can be important. And number one, by building strong kids that have an internal sense of self-worth, resilience, empowerment, and a sense of lovability, reducing their vulnerability to abuse. Secondly, dads can have an influence on the strength and nature of the parents' relationship, which has been shown to be a factor in prevention of child sexual abuse. And finally, in community modulation and the responses around the issue, the tribal, which I won't particularly talk about. I want to focus particularly on individual fathers. So again, before I go into the Fathering Project work, I'll discuss the evidence for how better fathering and father figures can specifically change the future of child sexual abuse. The first is listening skills, so that kids can disclose without fear of the big four: disbelief, an angry reaction, blame, or trivialization. And this is a big deal because in our Fathering Project research, we have found that when we have a basic level of definition of what good listening is, in over 10,000 dads, our responses are that only 1% do that. That is 99% are bad listeners. We have a powerful effect in changing that. Here's an image of a dad listening to a daughter. Secondly is the awareness of the danger of child sexual abuse and the things that create that danger, but trying to do that without inducing anxiety, making worse the epidemic of teenage anxiety, thinking that everything's dangerous, or global distrust, that everybody is dangerous and the world is a dangerous place. So getting that balance of awareness without eroding all trust is a powerful role that fathers and father figures can have. Thirdly, that worth a child's innocence that kids can carry around for life, that robust ego. By ego, I don't mean I am more important than anybody else. That usually comes from a weak ego, a low sense of worth, that feeling, less special than other kids. Making kids realise that they're worthy. I'll talk about that. And this, of course, makes them less vulnerable to anyone who shows interest inappropriately. And finally, resilience, so that kids feel empowered. If you can't change the world, you can change the inner sense of empowerment that kids can have, a resilience, which I'll mention. So dads are important, and so what can the Fathering Project do? And before I talk about what the Fathering Project does, I thought I'd just mention that we'd love to recruit you, the audience, into our processes. We'd love you to sign up and promote the Fathering Project through your various activities, and also help us as resource people, if you'd like. Anyway, how did the Fathering Project begin? Well, it began in my role as a doctor, in my consulting room, talking to men. I have to break the bad news to men quite frequently. I'm a lung specialist and lung cancer is common. So I've done the journey to death with lots of cancer patients. And this is what they say. Number one, they regret not spending more time with their kids and not being a better dad. and they can't get the time back again. And secondly, they just have no idea how to do it. I mean, things change so quickly for kids. And so these are the things that triggered me to write a book, actually, called Fathering from the Fast Lane about 23 years ago, trying to help dads. And I imagined that would be the end of it, but it's turned into the Fathering Project. But I'll just tell you about one guy who's given me permission to tell his stories. This is Peter, the plumber, who he bought my book, and he came to my office and he said to me, "Dad, Bruce, I can't read your book on dads. I bought it, I can't read it." And I'm thinking, this is terrible. I thought I'd written it in a user-friendly way, a plumber would like it. He said, "Don't get me wrong, Bruce, it's easy to read. It's just that I get to the end of one page and I start to weep. And I think about all those things I could have done and didn't. I just thought that work and providing for the family was important. My wife would bring up the kids. And now I'm distant from my kids and I just can't get the time back again. I know they respect me and love me, but anyway, he said, "Bruce, you've got to get to dads and you've got to get to them early." So that's how the Fathering Project basically started. But how does it come about? How does a man neglect the well-being of his children in favour of work? Well, we have a phrase that we developed from work we did by invitation with the West Coast Eagles and a number of other sporting clubs. And this is the scoreboard, and you can see the score there. And we did the work with the coaches. The only measure of their success in life is this scoreboard, of their success as a coach, I should say. The score, they can't kick 10 goals and the team loses and still feel good about themselves. So when we were down at the Oval talking to the group of coaches, I thought about the scoreboard and I discussed the scoreboard. It was just outside the room in which we were meeting, and I talked about the fact that the scoreboard measures their success as a coach, and that's probably pretty reasonable. I mean, if you're people in the audience, there will be a scoreboard that measures your success in your work. There is in mine, particularly in research. We all have measurements, and some of them are external. And if you sell cars, how many cars have you sold that year? But some of them are internal. Your father-in-law owns the business and you have an internal calibration or an internal scoreboard of success that he may not have. And that leads to scoreboard pressure, a well-known phrase in sporting circles. But what it can lead to, and the reason that we were asked to speak to this football club and many others, is scoreboard tyranny. It doesn't take long before that scoreboard tyrannises you. And I don't know, sitting in the audience, whether you feel like you might have a tyranny of a scoreboard, some external measure or internal measure of your success in your work that gets in the way. What else related to that have I learnt from my consulting chair? And it's the caramello point. And here's an example, right? So here's a picture of an egg, beautiful chocolate egg, and people say, "Wow, isn't that man successful? I wish I had his life. He's got a family, he's got a lot of money, a house overlooking the ocean, he's got a boat, he's got a vineyard, he's got this, he's got that, he's famous, he's popular." But when they get into my consulting room, and the thing about anyone in a caring profession, a doctor, psychologist, social worker, pastor or whatever, pretty soon you see inside and you see if it's got anything in there. And so often these guys have got a hollow life. They feel that their life is hollow. And, this is what I've learned, that they have an empty personal life and they feel like they're living a lie. The other people see them and they don't get it right. But there's a thing called a caramello life, which you might remember is a form of chocolate. It's actually got a rich golden core. And I will need to just stop now because my granddaughter's just coming in. One moment. Sorry about that. My 3-year-old granddaughter came in. A caramello life, it has a rich golden core. So why can't guys get it? What have we learnt? Well, they need an awareness of what it is, and then they need an intentionality to seek it. And these are the things that the Fathering Project works on, helping dads to realise that to get away from scoreboard pressure and have a rich golden core in their life, they need to be aware of what that means and intentional about finding it. So what does the Fathering Project do? Well, firstly, we create, firstly, I should say it's about changing the future of kids. Just so you're clear, it's not about helping dads so much. It's actually about changing the future of kids via dads. We create resources. You can see what they are on our Fathering Project website. We have a lot of outreach. An example is outreach to schools. We form dads groups in schools. I think we're about over 500 schools in the country. And we do the things that I mentioned. We have father-child activities, and then we talk to dads and get them talking to each other about best practice in being a good dad. And there's an example, a beautiful example of kids and dads in a dads group event. We also have outreach to workplaces, especially male-dominant workplaces, mining and construction, etc., and in the community, councils, sports clubs, churches, etc. We have a fathering channel which really kicked off during COVID, and at least 250,000 people are interacted with via our books, internet, etc. And just it's hard to kind of assess those things, to be honest, but personally, myself, I have spoken to around 40,000 people in live audience, almost all dads. And when I do that, I do lots of research and chats and various things. So a lot of awareness, I guess, and measurement of what dads care about and what their struggles are. Third thing we do is research. It's a university-based, UWA-based activity, and that guarantees two things, or should guarantee two things. One is that it's about best practice. Research, best practice, not about philosophy. And it's certainly secular. There's nothing else, no religion, politics, which is why we're allowed into all the schools, invited into. We'd be in every school in the country if we had enough people. It's a very powerful force. Anyway, that's led to some other books, including books on daughters and dads, some videos, fathering channel, and recently a new channel called Tips for Dads, which is designed to reach the dads that we're not already engaging with through dads groups, the dads who are out there in the country, in Australia, or anywhere else, to be honest, providing tips that they can engage with through social media in the first instance. Now, I've talked about daughters and dads, but we also are reminded, of course, that we work closely with dads of boys and talk to them about boys because they are tomorrow's men. I mean, that may be obvious, but we like to focus on that and separate a lot of the discussion about boys from that about girls, for dads and for father figures. So we start early, but we don't shy away from the notion of future risk. I mean, people look at their little kids, kindy kids, year 1, year 2, and they think, oh, nothing could possibly go wrong. And the way to a man's heart is through his kids. So we start to tell them about what fathers of teenage kids think is a problem and the big challenges that they're facing. And we like for them to get in early. And they pick up the newspaper and they think it's going to be someone else. So here's some newspaper headlines about domestic violence, child abuse, kids bullying, etc., teenage suicide. So dads start to get a sense of this. But the question is, how do we convince dads that they're important? How do we get in with these dads at year 1 and say, well, you've got to get in early because your kids face risks? Hard for you to believe. These are the risks. There are 4 big ones that fathers of teenage dads are worried about. One is mental health issues, depression, anxiety, the epidemic of teenage anxiety, and in its worst form, suicide. Secondly, problems with education, a disinterest in education, failure at school, bullying, bad attitude to education, bad attitude to teachers, leading to unemployability. Thirdly, substance abuse, drugs, alcohol, the ice epidemic. Ice is a party drug and leading to addiction. And finally, loss of values, crime, domestic violence, and a feeling of emptiness without a sense of values and a North Star to guide them. Anyway, what is the father effect on these things? That's the most important thing to bring up, and I'll tell you what it is. Based on statistics, the difference between having a good dad and no dad or a bad dad is a good dad reduces the child's risks of these things, mental health things, challenges by 30%. I think that's a soft number, but I'm being honest to the statistics. Disinterest and bad attitude to education, 80%. Substance abuse, 50%. Appreciating that dads aren't the only factor, they're just a powerful factor. And then respect, values, etc., 80%. I mean, I think you can immediately see why we are so passionate about the work of the Fathering Project with dads. Nothing comes close to affecting these challenges in society as getting to dads and helping them be good dads. So what do we do to create good dads? Well, I mentioned we target early primary school years. This might be obvious, but I'm going to mention it's turning the tap off rather than mopping up the water. There's so many wonderful organisations that help kids, young dads, drug abuse, mental health, etc., mopping up water, but they keep coming in. So we are trying to turn the tap off, and which makes it a much more powerful process. So here's a group of dads, actually from one of our dads groups talking, and they always say to us, typical dads, I guess, okay, Bruce, we get it, we're important, and we better get involved, but what tomorrow morning, from when we wake up, what can we do? Give us something specific that we can do. So I'll tell you what we tell them. The first is, and the really important way to start is that, okay, what do kids really need from you, dads? They think that going to soccer every Saturday morning, I never miss a game, is enough. It is not. This is what we talk about in terms of what every kid needs from dads. And we call it the BUS principle. This is like a summary of child psychology, if you want to be simplistic. BUS stands for being there for them, loving the kids unconditionally, and making them feel special. Being there means being there for them when they need you. This is about security. And, this is like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, a very, very fundamental part of that. And if you want to get a sense of this, ask yourself in the audience there, who was always there for you when you were young? When you needed someone, who did you know would always be there for you? And I'm a bit of a hero here in this regard. This is, you might know this guy. He was a champion footballer, father of a son who was a champion footballer who had drug addiction very publicly. Ben Cousins, this is Brian, close friend of mine, who's given me permission to say that he's my hero. He talk about someone who's always been there for his son, regardless. So many drug addicts find that their father's just about, say, I've had enough. Sort yourself out. Secondly, unconditional love. Very difficult. Here's two daughters of the same family. One's pretty and she's also ducks of school and she's captain of netball and she's a prefect. The other one is none of those things. How easy is it for the second girl, the second daughter, to think my dad would love me if only I was just more like my sister? To show that your love has no conditions, it is independent of performance, is a powerful thing to teach dads to do. And again, I ask you in the audience, who did you know that loved you unconditionally when you were a kid? And even now, if your whole life went south, who would be there for you and love you still? Most people don't have many. So important that every kid knows that their dad, of course their mum as well, but we're focusing on dads here because they're the ones who are missing in action. So important that they communicate their love is unconditional. And if they don't, kids are prone to anxiety, such as through social media, cyberbullying, depression, poor socialisation, sense of lack of worth, lack of empowerment, and then acting out, such as alcohol and drugs. So these are all well known, but these are really powerful reasons for showing that your love is unconditional. And the S of BUS is that every child needs to feel that they are special, not a sausage coming out of a sausage factory. And just quickly, we pass on two major tips. Dad dates, where dad takes the kids out one at a time. Just one dad, not dad and mum, not dad and his mates, just one child. And secondly, dad trips. Now, why do they work? We have a thing called the big W. Have a guess in your head now what you think that W stands for. This is the reason they work. Well, I'll tell you, it's worth. My dad could be doing anything, playing golf or working, and he could be with all his mates. But he chooses to spend time with me. I must be worth spending time with. I must be a worthwhile person. This is why they work. A child feels special. Now, we're always asked this, so I'm quickly going to do this. What specific topics do we address? So that's generic, what do all kids need from their dads? What topics do we address? And I mention this because you need to know, or I'd like you to know, what we talk to dads groups about. One topic each evening. These are the topics. What do kids really need? I've mentioned that already, BUS. We talk about daughters versus sons. What do daughters need as compared to sons? It's not exactly the same, and dads usually have no idea. They've been a boy, but they have no idea what girls need. Time. Dads worry about it, work-life balance, especially nowadays that as it invades your home life. We have tips about how to get work-life balance and create time with kids. Education. We talked about the power of dads to influence a kid's attitude to education. Love of learning, curiosity, problem solving, attitude to teachers. We talk about risks, and I mentioned them, mental health, drugs, etc. How dads can speak into a child's life and reduce their risk of depression and all those mental health issues. And values, respect and integrity. And not just teaching the kids about them, but role modelling them in front of the kids. Respect and integrity, two values that everyone agrees on. We talk about health, exercise, sport, the value of team sport, the magnificent 7 reasons why all kids should do team sports, and getting them away from the screens. We talk about father figures. The dads are sitting in a room. We say we're not going to talk now about your children. We're going to talk about you as a father figure. Your power to speak into the lives of your kids' friends when they walk into the house, or if you're a soccer coach or footy coach or whatever. As a father figure, you're an uncle, you're a grandfather. As I just showed with my little 3-year-old granddaughter walking in, pastor, anyone, every man's a father figure. You're either a good one or a bad one, or usually no father figure at all. Powerful potential role, especially in at-risk kids whose dads are either lousy or absent. He's a grandfather talking to his grandson. We talk to dads about challenges that they face, specific challenges, FIFO, divorce and separation, becoming a better listener, how to do that, handling grief, the father, mother might get dementia or die, etc. FIFO is a big challenge, obviously, in Western Australia. How to do that well instead of how to cause problems in kids. We talk about challenges that kids can have and helping dads to think through them. Disability is one thing, physical or intellectual disability, but just grief. Our grandparents die and child's in grief. I mean, dads have no idea usually how to respond to that. Disability. So we talk about resilience as a separate topic, how you can make your kids resilient regardless of what's happening around whether the school or the community or their friends or their peers don't change. How you can make them resilient. And cyberbullying is a classic issue of that because it penetrates a child's consciousness, potentially 24 hours a day anonymously. And finally, we talk about the epidemic of male loneliness and the power of dads groups and what dads can learn in dads groups. And we encourage them to get together for coffee, talk to each other, discuss probably one of our topics, and then hopefully form dads groups in schools and workplaces and communities, etc. I think you get a sense of how incredibly powerful the Fathering Project can be if we could just get to every dad in the country. So as I said, we form dads groups and they have activities. Such a beautiful sight to see this. And I've got to say, of course, it's easy to form a dads group and get them interested in a white collar area. You might get 200 dads coming along and they form a dads group. In the blue collar areas and the lower socioeconomic, it's harder. We actually focus intentionally on those areas, and I've got to admit that I have a real heart for that. I grew up in such an area. I love it. I love working with those dads. And we get them talking. And I won't tell you about how we do that, but it's music. It's like music. When I'm doing a dad's group, and I don't do most of them now, other people do them, but I love listening to the dads talking to each other. And when I say, we have to finish in 30 seconds, guys, they're chatting, and after a minute and a half, I say, we've just got 15 seconds to go, dads. They'll leave them another 2 minutes. Okay, guys, we've got to get back to... It's just music to my ears because I know it's helping. And we have things like campouts. This is a camp out at the football stadium and have activities all day long and a meal. And I took this photo at night leaving the stadium and it brought tears to my eyes. 80% of those dads and kids have never been camping, and here they are with a little light on inside the tent having a father-child activity. Oh, it's magnificent, powerful. I do need to, before I wrap it up, discuss an obvious question. Do we get into trouble that we have a gender-biased project? Fathering. Do we get negativity from the mothers because of that? Absolutely rare. Before we started, I actually spoke to a friend of mine who's a feminist lady, and I said, how do I answer the inevitable anger from the microphone? It virtually never happens. In fact, quite the opposite. The mothers in the P&C are begging the Fathering Project to run dads groups in the school. They're begging us to do it. And the sole parent mums say, look, my kids, I sense that they need some father figures. Can you talk to the other dads in the school and blah, 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 and the sports coaches? So to my surprise, you occasionally get it from people who don't know what we do and how we do it. But we honour the role of mothers, and they are honestly on board with everything we do. So again, I remind you that although we're working with dads, it's about changing the future of kids. And it's interesting that this is a summary of what we do by our patron, John Anderson, former Deputy Prime Minister of Australia. He says that the Fathering Project is the most powerful force in Australia today to change the future of our kids. I think it's right. Statistically, it's correct. And we are getting to dads. People are amazed that we can actually get dads into a room. We can actually get to them. Mostly they say, oh, I'll get my wife to do that. His mother will do that. She'll come home and give me a couple of dot points. And I confess, when I was a young dad, that I used to say that to my wife, Jackie. But I've since realised, get to dads face to face, and they get it quickly, and they will be intentional about changing. So to contact us, here's the Fathering Project's website. As I say, the office is in Sydney. We're in all states who have we're active not-for-profit all around the country doing all sorts of things. And you can look at that website. And this new one is called Tips for Dads. The landing page is actually on my own personal website. But simple thing, you could do it now. Go onto YouTube, search for Tips for Dads, one word with a number 4, and you'll get a whole bunch of videos. And we'd love you to share those, subscribe, but share them with as many dads as you can, so that straight to their phone they'll get 1 minute, 2 minute clips on how they can be a better dad. Thanks so much for listening.